Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, August 22nd, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks, and this is the five-time award-winning Majority Report, broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, a brand new interview that Sam Seder just did with Dale Beran. It came from something awful, how a toxic troll army accidentally memed Donald Trump, the chosen one, into office. The chosen one was my joke, not the full title of the book. That interview was recorded just recently. Bernie Sanders unveils a $16 trillion Green New Deal plan to combat the climate crisis, achieve full employment on the heels of a radical labor and criminal justice plans. I guess more folks have plans now and a movement. ABC News reporting on the fires blazing through the Amazon. Fires set into play by the fascistic Brazilian government in spite of lies from the Bolsonaro regime that they were set by NGOs. This in conjunction with already a rights crisis facing indigenous people in Brazil, ecocide and ethnic cleansing on the heels of 500 days of the political imprisonment of Lula da Silva. However, Congressman Hank Johnson, along with Ro Khanna, Ilhan Omar, Susan Weil, Veronica Escobar, and several others have called on the DOJ to provide answers for its close coordination with the Lava Jato investigation, which put Lula in jail and set the stage for the destruction of the Amazon. Trump says he's seriously looking at ending birthright citizenship on the heels of wanting to detain children indefinitely in camps. Time to be serious. In fact, it already was well timed to be serious. 70 mayors sign a letter opposing the Trump administration's proposal to restrict access to food stamps. At least 8 jail officials knew that Jeffrey Epstein was not to be left alone in his cell. But yet somehow it still happened. Is this who we are? Are we really a giant CIA operation? Jay Inslee is ending his climate change-driven campaign for president. The only one, besides, I guess, Bill de Blasio, fresh off of the heels of calling for the freeing of Leonard Peltier, who should not drop out. Congress pumps brakes on an interior push to relocate the Bureau of Land Management to make it easier for land exploitation. And Trump says he's got a great Medal of Honor winner in mind. Can you guess who that Medal of Honor winner might be? Any guesses? Who would Donald Trump like to award the Medal of Honor? One word. Guess. Give me one name. Who would... I mean, come on, guys.
Don King.
That is a great guess. It is not true, but I love the thinking. Myself. I would like very much to award myself a Medal of Honor. Thank you. A Medal of Honor winning. I'm not mentioned. So stupid. So stupid.
It's called the Medal of the King of Jerusalem.
There's a lot of analysis about the new anti-Semitism coming from the Trump gang yesterday, and I think we covered a lot of it. But I don't remember if we put this take forward yesterday, but I forget who. I think it was Orisa on Twitter. and I apologize, this isn't in the prep. I just remembered this. But the point of the tweet was this is also just being super pissed. Because in Trump's head, he doesn't have any historical or analytic awareness of anything. So he's given and indulged the far-right regime in Israel of their every single wish. And he still can see a poll that Jewish voters aren't flipping to him. So he's livid. And I think that's 100% true.
Yeah, don't tell me we're not backsliding on race when they're bringing back old forms of bigotry that we haven't even seen in a while.
I mean, so many different things are happening on race right now, including, I don't even know, backsliding, reinvention of apartheid for the 21st century. But no doubt. And that's why I always say there's only one place where fascism is safe for Jews. I mean, I'm being a little flippant, but that's also like a serious point. You know, I wouldn't get too comfortable in any type of authoritarian far right leaning regime if you're Jewish, even if there's a marriage of convenience with the far right authoritarians in Israel. But let's get to Brazil. We know, and it has been repeated, that the Amazon is a core fulcrum in the Earth's planetary system. We already know that we're in an ecological crisis. This is B-roll of the fires in the Amazon. Now, it's very important to note, and I just want to say here, I mean, look, and also how the fires are affecting cities in Brazil. It's very important to be real here that this is a political project. This is inseparable from the Bolsonaro government. This is inseparable from the U.S. backing of things like Lava Jato, the Wall Street endorsement of J.R. Bolsonaro. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, on the day that Bolsonaro won, put out a tweet saying, you know, he's controversial, but great business opportunities. So it's extremely important that we frame and understand what this is, which is that J.R. Bolsonaro, along with the Republican Party, is the greatest threat to human survival on planet Earth right now. That this is a political decision. This is an ecocide and a global ecological threat. And it's also absolutely a form of ethnic cleansing of the Brazilian indigenous communities. And that there is a long policy set which implicates the Obama administration, the DOJ, Wall Street, mining and ag businesses that lead to this moment we're in, which is literally life and death for the entire planet. This is a report from Brian Mayer. He's a reporter, of course, for Telesur and also co-editor of Brazil Wire, which is the indispensable Brazil resource everybody needs to read, reporting from Sao Paulo yesterday on the fires.
I'm standing on the north side of Sao Paulo, where the entire city is engulfed in smog, as it has been since Monday, in a weather phenomenon that's related to smoke coming up from the Amazon rainforest, where thousands of fires are currently raging. Now, every year in the dry season in the Amazon region, small farmers and ranchers practice slash and burn agriculture techniques. They burn the scrub on their land, and it creates nutrients in the soil. It's not good for the environment, but it's hard to convince them to stop doing it. But what's happening this year is different. President Jair Bolsonaro is giving out signals to the big loggers and agribusiness companies that they can invade natural parks and indigenous reservations and chop down trees and burn whatever they want. And so there's huge fires out of control, animals are dying, and the risk is that if he continues acting this way, there could be a phenomenon called dieback, in which the entire forest could burn down uncontrollably if it reaches a certain point of deforestation. And some biologists are predicting this could happen by 2030. Now, if Bolsonaro stays in power acting this way, the odds are that this is really going to happen. And since the Amazon provides the world with 20% of its oxygen, it would be a catastrophe.
Jair Bolsonaro is the greatest threat to human survival on planet Earth right now. But by extension, obviously, the United States government, the corporations that have backed him. And this needs to be understood politically. It needs to be understood economically. And we'll certainly get back to, the latest about the political imprisonment of Lula. But everybody who, first of all, backed and orchestrated this process and then uncritically covered it has a direct stake and implication in something that literally threatens the future of the entire planet and is a crisis, a profound crisis in Brazil right now. Several weeks ago, an indigenous leader was murdered. This also correlates with regular shootings of activists and organizers in Brazil, ongoing threats, legal and extrajudicial, against Glenn Greenwald. And just 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, Marielle Franco's wife, her widow, went to go visit Lula in prison. Marielle, of course, was assassinated by a cartel that a lot of reports can link to the Bolsonaro family. So that's what's happening, and it is a matter of utmost urgency. We have, I guess, an ad to get to, and then we will come right back with Sam's interview. But Sam gave you this pitch.
Thanks, Michael. Before we get to author Dale Beran on his book, It Came From Something Awful, How a Toxic Troll Army Accidentally Memed Donald Trump into Office, let me just remind you folks, now that the weather is still a little bit warmer, might be time to switch up your sheets and duvets to something a little breezier. From Brooklinen's newest linen collection, these beautiful airy linen pieces that give your bedroom a certain chic. Do you hear that, Matt?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Gives you a relaxed feel.
That's what my bedroom's like.
Yes, I can imagine. They don't have a gamer's version of this. But these things, they have a relaxed feel. They give you the ultimate comfort, and they look a little bit stylish. Not to mention, available 12 different colors and patterns. My Brooklinen sheets, it's very hard for me to disaggregate a lot of changes over my life for the past year and a half. Marital status changing. That means sleeping arrangements changing. That means I get to choose which sheets I use all the time. My Brooklinen sheets, it's hard for me to disaggregate the different emotions I'm feeling, but I'm feeling great. And part of it I know is my Brooklinen sheets. I don't want to go too deep into that, but they honestly, they look great. They feel great. They get better as you sleep on them. I have just now, it's just like they're my favorite t-shirt, except for I get to sleep in it every night. And it's in your name. It's in their name. So you know that Brooklinen's newest linen collection is amazing. Like I say, I can't recommend their products more. Graduates, newlyweds, friends, family, treating yourself to a bedroom upgrade you deserve. And now Brooklinen.com is giving my listeners an exclusive offer. Get 10% off and free shipping when you use the promo code majority at Brooklinen.com. Brooklinen is so confident that you're going to love their sheets or their comforters, towels, pillows. They all come with a lifetime warranty. The only way to get 10% off and free shipping, use promo code majority at Brooklinen.com. That's Brooklinen.com. Promo code majority. Brooklinen. These are the best sheets ever. Now we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll be talking to Dale Beran about his book.
Best sheets ever. Do you see? All right, guys. We have an interview now with Sam Seder and Dale Beran, author of It Came From Something Awful, How a Toxic Troll Army Accidentally Memed Donald Trump into Office. We'll be right back.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program freelance journalist, former cartoonist, and author of It Came From Something Awful, How a Toxic Troll Army Accidentally Memed Donald Trump into Office. Dale Beran, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's just start with your, I guess, let's start with something awful. What, and maybe it will sort of walk us through your journey, how you got there, and then we'll talk about how society sort of set up the table for this particular brand of, I guess, societal perspective, which brought us this toxic troll army. But tell us about something awful. Like, what was your involvement in that? What was that?
it was a website in the 90s. It still exists. It was a sort of toxic forum where there was sort of like the depth of kind of dark humor and 90s nihilism was expressed there. So it was about kind of self-hating gamers who would kind of make fun of dropping out and playing games and hating sort of this like commodified lifestyle where you're just sort of like hanging out, you've dropped out of life and you're very nihilistic. And that evolved, that spawned another site called 4chan, which was even more nihilistic and sort of even more about dropping out and playing video games all day. And that slowly evolved sort of into a political movement, first on the left, and then it spawned the far right. So that's sort of in a nutshell, that's what the book is about, tracing that history of the alt-right, which came out of this anime website, or the sort of set of websites about playing video games and dropping out of life.
All right, so let's track that, how nihilism turns into a I maybe hesitate to say a political movement, but certainly almost a strange political ideology of sorts. Just, I guess, tell folks like what, and I think most people by now know what 4chan and 8chan are, but what is 4chan and 8chan?
They are online message boards. Anonymous for the most part, so you don't have to say who you are when you post, and they're sort of known first as sort of anime-themed message boards, but also known for really dark, cynical content, and they've spawned a variety of sociologically important things like memes. They more or less invented the idea of memes, and then they invented then Anonymous, the sort of far-left hacktivist collective, came out of 4chan around 2008. And then they largely spawned the alt-right around 2014, 2015. So very large internet message boards that sort of, to me, I argue, are sort of the center of a sort of type of youth counterculture that then sort of evolves into political movements.
Now, the people, as you talk about these sort of different eras of 4chan, right? Anonymous and then, Gamergate, I guess, and maybe the alt-right and whatnot. These are not necessarily the same people, right? They're different generations of people who are like adopting parts of the generation that was prior to them. And by generation, I'm using the term, I guess, maybe a little loosely or a little specifically, not necessarily. Although maybe we're speeding up in that way, but I mean, is that right?
Right. We, in some sense, I sort of use these sites to kind of make a sociological argument about sort of trends and sort of to understand the phenomenon of like why suddenly in 2015 there's this huge fascist movement on this very popular message board. But actually going out and speaking to people from the sites, people using the sites and going out and finding sources for the book, some of them are the same, right? Some of them kind of have gone through the whole thing. For the most part, the far-left anonymous hacktivist group are different. So part of why the right, far-right movement spawned was there was a quote-unquote moral vacuum where all those people left. A lot of people grew up, left the site. But a lot of folks sort of, the idea is that you sort of have this vast disenfranchised group of people who sort of ever more marginalized, right? Like after the 2008 crash, there were just sort of men that just dropped out. They never came back. And they ended up, well, in that case, you're on the internet, you're hanging out, and the people who were there in 2005 and were like, haha, I'm dropping out of life, I'm a Gen Xer, I'm like, life sucks. Then 20 years passes, right? And like the idea is that how long can you be a nihilist? How long can you do that? And the answer is not long, right? So at first they try the left. They're like, all right, well, we're going to break out of our mom's basements and we're going to have this hacktivist political movement that is going to destroy a big government or the industrial complex or big corporations. But that gets crushed by the FBI around 2012. And there's still a lot of people left. And there's new kids, right? So the phenomenon of like, the idea that like, oh, you're 19, you're 20, and still life sucks. You get to be shuffled into a cubicle or you get to work at Taco Bell. Well, the idea of that, like, video games and the internet, all that stuff's expanding. Those worlds are more enthralling than ever. So like that idea that 4chan invented that like in 2005 you'll drop out, the kids in 2015, they're like, yeah, more than ever, I'm going to do that. So then that culture gets inherited, right? So it's sort of like a rolling ball that just keeps going, where like the phenomenon, the underlying phenomenon that created is still there. So 4chan's culture just keeps ballooning and then creating new politics that float up to the political sphere.
Do we have an analog? I mean, because it feels like there is something structural about the internet, and more narrowly, you know, like an existing message board, that we don't necessarily have an analog for past generations. So if and you start the book out talking a little bit about the counterculture in the 60s and how in many respects it became absorbed by the culture and then commodified and sold back to us in many ways, like the Gap, for instance, in San Francisco. But it was very hard to maintain whatever feelings or attitudes there were from the late 60s, because there was no third place, if you will, where the dynamic was static. So, and maybe I'm not articulating that clearly enough, but that an unmoderated, self-maintained, almost, online VFW hall, right? Where people could go, and there's obviously like some institutional memory of the attitudes that drove people there in the first place. You know, you've got a lot of misfits, you got a lot of people who are alienated, and this is a place for me to go where I can also sort of redesign who I am in some way. It's almost as if, Woodstock existed, never shut down, right? There was constantly rolling for years and years. Obviously, that the ethos from the original Woodstock would live on longer. And it sort of feels like that's happened with 4chan. But the core basis of that ethos, which is like we live outside of things, was the only thing that changed. And sort of what filled it changed a little bit. But that core ethos of like, hey, we're in an unmoderated forum. We're outside of things. We're almost outlaws on some level, right? I mean, that seems to be the only thing that maintained through that period.
In some sense, yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting point. And I agree. All those elements are there, right? The outsider, the rebel, the people that don't want to be part of society or sort of want to make their own rules, right? Did always have that sort of independent streak. I mean, I guess to sort of touch on these things in the way that I ordered them in the book, the idea is that, well, as you sort of described, the internet was created by these out of this sort of 60s counterculture, and they're like, oh, the rebellion will be there, like Woodstock, the new Woodstock will be there. And then instead what occurred was, by the time the 80s and 90s roll around, there's sort of this idea that capitalism will last forever in the American style, that's sort of the end of history, the Fukuyama idea that like, that was it. And then counterculture from the 90s, which was my generation, we said, oh, well, there's nowhere to go, right? There's only despair, only sort of dropping out and nihilism. And that became this sort of dropping out in the computer world. And so by the early 2000s, you sort of get that nihilistic youth counterculture. They're like, well, where are we going? We're just going to drop out. We're going to live in the screen. And the real world kind of sucks because it doesn't really offer us much. And sort of like what happened, that was 4chan. And so what then happened was by the time you get to 2008, they're ready to rebel. They're sort of ready to sort of take action and become hackers, sort of like in that revolutionary sense that was envisioned by the 60s. And they do. It really does happen on 4chan. But when that movement's broken, then sort of like what happens is you get another generation coming in, and they're like, well, now where do we go? We still have that sort of nihilistic idea, like more than ever. They're sort of like, well, now there's even less hope for us. And that ends up sort of devolving into the alt-right. But that to touch on the other point that you talked about where it's new, right? The new part is that there's sort of this echo chamber effect where it turns out sort of unique to the internet that if you get a bunch of people together, they're going to encourage really bad behavior among themselves. So whether that's sort of thinspo, inspiring to be thin, or sort of incels and sort of where you're like, oh, we all get together and like we're all going to decide that we're doomed. We're never going to go outside. We're never going to have romantic partners, right? So there's sort of, that was the new effect. But the other part's very old, right? So like the idea that in 2015, 2016, and 2017, you get like young people becoming communists and young people becoming fascists, and they're battling on the streets because capitalism once again has become so unequal and sort of so dysfunctional, right? That's old. It's just expressing itself again through the internet, through these weird forums that started out about anime.
Does the idea, I mean, because we should talk about Gamergate. I mean, all of this fascinates me for multiple reasons. I mean, I was told when we first went on Air America, we had a website for the Majority Report, which was just an old movable type with just, comments, but we wouldn't blog very much. It really just functioned as a completely unmoderated, chat forum. And we would have anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people a day, mostly through those 3 hours, and thousands of comments per hour because we were pushing people there from the radio site. And I had people who told me that some elements of Anonymous were, would gather there because it was completely unmoderated and it moved quite rapidly and whatnot. And then, 5 or 6 years later, I'm doing this version of the show, and one of my producers at the time who was hosting, wanted to talk about Gamergate, which I had no idea what it was. And I wonder,
why would you?
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Like at the time, it was pure garbage, right? It's like, to me, it's like Dennis Rodman visiting North Korea, right? You're like, you just want to forget it. It's pure garbage.
But even less so, right?
And then like 2 years later, you're like, oh, that's the imprint. That's like Donald Trump visiting. It's the same thing, right? Like it becomes historically important, right?
Exactly. And so, but I mean, there's two things that occur to me about Gamergate, and I want you to tell people what Gamergate was for folks who don't remember, and also the concept of incels, because one of the things that really seems clear to me is that during this period of time, we have sort of this, to borrow your phrase, a toxic brew of one, a financial collapse, right? So you have people who are going through economic hardship, on top of which we're having fairly significant strides in social emancipation, if you will. We have the election of the first African-American president. We have we're hurtling towards marriage equality. We have the election came down to a woman and an African-American man. Everyone anticipated that the next president would be a woman. So we're getting further, sort of social emancipation. And it doesn't surprise me that on some level, to be counterculture at this moment in time is to essentially be a conservative reactionary. And certainly there were those people who are trying to sort of build this ideology during the aughts, but it wasn't quite there because things were pretty, it was not clear where the culture was going in terms of this stuff. But by 2008, there was a sense of like it's going in not the direction the conservatives of the George Bush movement had. So tell us what Gamergate came out of, because to me, as I've told people about it, it's like, I'm basically telling you a story that you probably encountered in junior high. But it grew into something massive.
Right. So, yeah, it was sort of this piece of cultural garbage in 2014. It was sort of a harassment campaign that started on 4chan. So 4chan was part of this, or really the center of troll culture, where they would gang up and harass people, and that turned before into this hacktivist movement where they'd harass Scientology or a government. But in 2014, the people left there harassed a game developer, and the idea was they were insulted that she was bringing feminism to games, essentially. That was their complaint. There was a bunch of other hyper detail that's sort of not really relevant.
Well, but I do think this is relevant insofar as it was a guy who broke up with a girl, or a girl who broke up with a guy. And the guy...
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Basically created this narrative.
He was sort of a jilted ex or something, and he posted this long, angry screed to kind of inspire the angry young men on 4chan. He knew already that this woman, Zoe Quinn, the game developer, was already being targeted already by sort of the incel community at that point. And so he sort of like wanted to rally them. So he created this long, angry post. And he's like, these are all the horrible things she did. And it just became this huge harassment campaign, like bigger almost than any personal harassment campaign 4chan had ever done. And so the idea is like, well, where did all that passion come from? Why did they mobilize around that? And the idea was then full of young men who had really just dropped out in a way that was more than any other in the past, sort of more otaku, more hikikomori is sort of the Japanese term for it, where you're just withdrawing, living life by the computer and convincing themselves that they would never go out, they would never have a romantic partner, they would never succeed in life, that they were on the bottom. And so this idea that like, oh, I can't go into a video game and then seduce a woman in the video game and sort of have these misogynistic fantasies in my video game. Well, that's my only retreat. That's the only place I can go. So they got really mad. And this was their way, their really immature, kind of deranged way of expressing it. But that coalesced into a political movement. After that movement on 4chan, all these young men on 4chan and 8chan, they realized, oh, we have this sort of thing in common. We're similar. We don't like feminism. And at the time, what happened was, as the coalition was forming, there were sort of these hucksters on YouTube that would be like, oh, well, I'll be your mouthpiece. I'll speak for you. I'll be kind of like your stand-in dad for the young men living, like raising themselves on the internet. And that was Milo Yiannopoulos. That was Mike Cernovich. That was Sargon of Akkad, whatever. All these like sort of, now it's a cottage industry of conservative YouTube dads kind of like raising these kids online. But like back then, that was sort of the first wave. They were Gamergaters. And that just evolved. That was 2014. So 2015, Gamergate peters out. Trump starts.
Now, hold on for 1 second. Let me just say something about 2014 so people understand how this grows. I mean, because it is an astonishing story that we're really talking about a guy who breaks up with a girl and then basically harnesses the misogyny that is existing, and they use to basically talk about this. It was literally, and I just remember this, that people were complaining about the lack of ethics in gaming journalism.
Yeah, that was their line, right?
They felt this woman was getting...
It was totally fabricated. It was nonsense, right? It turns out it was a typo in the guy's script. He thought, the way that he wrote it, he's like, oh, maybe she sort of knew this guy that wrote a review of her game, but it turned out not to be true.
Right. So, and it ended up being this whole notion of... But I think it's important, too, because it's relevant that it's an attack on the media. Now, I don't take gaming media seriously. I mean, I apologize. Gaming reviews, I know it's important, obviously, to people who read games. But this is setting up a structure of attacking an institution, which is the gaming media, to the extent that there was one. I think there was one. And like you say, there was a couple of YouTube hucksters who realized, if I cover this stuff and I become their champion, I'm going to make a lot of money and achieve a certain amount of celebrity. And that's exactly what happened.
Right. And, the game media at the time, they knew for the most part, they're like, look, these companies have trained these young men to be consumers, right? Gamergate described itself as a consumer revolt. And the idea was like, we want this out of our product. We want this out of our game. And like the idea was that that's all they had, right? Their whole life was sort of defined by dropping out, kind of consuming stuff, mostly just online products at their computer, right? So it's like you can see how that lifestyle is nihilistic and sort of desperate and longing in that void for something, for someone to come in and then be like, well, let me give you 12 rules to live your life or whatever, right? Yeah. Like, right. It's like Peterson who replaced Yiannopoulos, right? Like, let me tell you how to pull yourself up by your boot. Let me give you an off-the-rack value system because you have nothing, because you're sort of living in this sort of like hyper-nihilistic, unhappy life.
Indeed. And so we have that in 2014, and then it begins to, it feels like it begins to collapse under its own weight, right? Like the idea of ethics in gaming journalism only has so much durability. And now we're in 2015. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, what happens is that, it can't play out for long. So 2015, the same men who are on YouTube who are sort of purporting to be leaders of the movement, they need a new cause. And Trump is just starting his campaign. It turns out sort of Trump is uncannily sort of replicates their issues, right? They are young men who feel like they're on the bottom of society, and Trump's message is, "Oh, I'm gonna have you win so much you're gonna get sick of winning." Well, who is that message to but losers, right?
Right.
People are like, "Man, one day I'm really gonna win." So it was people who were sort of disenfranchised, and before it hadn't been a political coalition. They were the margins of other political coalitions. But now it's sort of like, oh, these young men under 40 who had dropped out of life, well, we're going to sort of form our own coalition, and we're going to rally around this guy who looks like a loser outsider, but at the same time, he's sort of like projecting what they imagine as success in life, which is sort of like an alpha male, right? They invented all this terminology where they imagined that like life was like a cruel competitive hierarchy, and they're on the bottom, but the idea is like, oh, I win if I get to the top. And that's, of course, the same sort of like ideology that Trump holds, right? That he's like the, I quote a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, who talks about the idea that like, oh, well, it's someone who would be flattered at being called a bloodthirsty animal, right? Like the idea that like you're a hyper-competitive businessman and all my friends are rivals, right? So it's weird that the men at the bottom felt this. But in fact, it was that same ideology that sort of drifted down to them, where they felt a union with those people like Bannon and Trump at the top.
Well, now that union with someone like Bannon was not necessarily a mistake, right? Because Bannon, and we should say Bannon at this point is running Breitbart, essentially. He's getting funding, as far as I can tell, from the Mercers. That money may have been secured before Breitbart died. And because Breitbart, I specifically remember, got about an $11 million infusion into the Breitbart site about a year before he died, somewhere around there, from some private firm, at a time where there was virtually no traffic on that Breitbart site. Breitbart, who believed that politics is downstream, I should say, from culture, that infused the ideology of that site. So how did Milo end up at Breitbart? Did Bannon basically see this building and say, this is energy that we can use?
I mean, it's a crazy story, and you're right? So it seems like a grassroots movement at first, but whatever part was grassroots, Steve Bannon, at the head of Breitbart at the moment, in 2015, took it and spent all that Mercer money to promote it through Yiannopoulos, right? So Yiannopoulos had been at Breitbart a little bit earlier, so he was already writing for Breitbart when Gamergate hit, and then he sort of switched to Gamergate, so they had already met, and he'd already been hired. And the idea is that Bannon and Yiannopoulos learned about 4chan and 8chan and these groups through Gamergate. And by 2015, Bannon shares a lot in common with them, and I argue in my book. He likes the same fascist philosophers that 4chan and 8chan were becoming enamored of, right? Like, he is into sword and sorcery. Like, his company is called Glittering Steel, right? He wrote these sort of hyper-masculine, sort of video game-style screenplays. So he loves this population, and he says, the quotes I have in the book are something like, he's like, these young, disenfranchised white males have monster power, and they come in through Gamergate or whatever, and now they're going to vote for Trump. So he gives Milo Yiannopoulos $1 million. They meet at the Cannes Film Festival. Mercer, Bannon, and Yiannopoulos meet. They give Yiannopoulos $1 million, and they say, go on tour. And Yiannopoulos goes on a tour that he calls the Dangerous Faggot Tour. And this just ends up in the bloody riots and the sort of clashes with Antifa that we see in 2016 at the end of 2016, and then continuing sort of snowballing and spiraling in 2017 until it ends in Charlottesville, which is sort of the last, most awful one, though they still go on a little bit, but not as much.
And this is it's so stunning to me how this all came out of essentially the spark was essentially this guy getting jilted by a woman, and this the strength of this misogyny. And we should say too, like and I've said this ad nauseum on this program, but there's a multitude of reasons why Hillary Clinton lost, but misogyny is certainly one of them. And to have this so much of what is going on, at least online, a function of the misogyny. And my question to you is like, and I know the book is that this troll army memed Donald Trump into office, but it really is more that this is indicative of perhaps a certain mentality that was existing, that Donald Trump took advantage of both in real life and online on some level. But to what extent do you think that this was used by Bannon to create? I mean, how do you think this was leveraged by him?
It was leveraged fairly well. He was sort of ahead of the curve at that point and realized that there was sort of this new coalition of young men that would vote for Trump, which is sort of unusual, right? The idea that in 2016, 2017, youth counterculture sort of breaks off and it kind of goes to the far right is pretty wild.
But it's not that many votes, right? I mean, they didn't get that many votes.
Yeah, right. So the idea is that the question of how many people voted is sort of, or how much it mattered sort of culturally is sort of a different issue, right? So, it's not like this is the entire Trump coalition, right? There's sort of, there's still sort of all of these, 1%ers who love that Trump's in office and all of these fooled white working class voters in the middle of the country, right? And then there's these people, right? So it's one coalition that Bannon realizes will also vote for him, and also sort of be the sort of cutting edge of meme creation. So like when Donald Trump tweets himself as Pepe the Frog, right? That's a 4chan symbol of loserdom. And when Donald Trump does it, he tags Breitbart in it, right? Like, so the idea is that they're sort of generating this sort of like cultural campaign that is going to look that makes Donald Trump look sort of cutting edge, and right. Hillary look like behind the curve, because she always is a little behind the curve already, right? So like it kind of re-emphasizes that. I mean, they've since sort of become disenfranchised or a little disenchanted with Trump, right? The Trump's incompetence has fragmented this coalition a little bit, but it still exists. It's just they're not too enamored of Trump anymore.
So where does this phenomena that you write about, where is it? I mean, place it for us, right? Because I'm looking at like, we have, let's say the IDW, right? Where someone like Shapiro comes out of the Breitbart world. Keeps some distance, I think, from that now, but it's not that too far of distance. Peterson and on some level Sam Harris. These are folks who and Joe Rogan to a certain extent even. Maybe perhaps a little bit more distant, but they all offer like a direction for young men as to like, this is how you can better yourself and empower yourself. There's a how-to quality to that. And we also, we still have sort of the hard alt-right, although they seem to have lost some traction. Bannon seems to be adrift. Like, where are these people? Is this phenomena over and it's just mutated into different things, or what?
I mean, it's certainly mutating, right? It's on the internet, so it mutates fast, and we've seen it mutate a lot. But it's not over. So Charlottesville, I would say it sort of has 2 or 3 sections, right? There was the Gamergate era. Then there's sort of the Trump era where they're emboldened. They go outside. Bannon has mobilized them. And then there's this third sort of post-Charlottesville era where the underlying phenomenon, right? These men still are disenfranchised. They still have very few prospects and sort of hope in their life. And they still sort of live very dark, nihilistic lifestyles, right? Like, life hasn't really gotten better for young people. They're still mired in debt and sort of on the bottom of the economic ladder. So those main causes are still there. So it's still there. The question of what form it takes, well, we now know there's been a lot of good reporting, and I'm still writing on it. And so the idea is that they're back on the internet. They're afraid to go outside. When they do have rallies, I go to the rallies, and they're sort of now embarrassed at being humiliated sort of in this culture. Most of them, they used to sort of be bold. Now they're sort of afraid to talk to me a lot of the time. But they're now on the internet, and they're hanging out in Discord groups. They're hanging out on 4chan and 8chan, and really, when they do go out, is when they're so despairing and nihilistic that they want to murder a bunch of people. That was the New Zealand shooting, and then the copycat shooting in Poway, California. Those were both 8chan shooters. So it sort of like links into this mass shooter phenomenon where a lot of those guys were alt-right. So it's still there, and we don't know what form it's going to take. But as you say, like, what happens is these sort of like hucksters at the top, the YouTube dads that are selling a lifestyle and sort of a way to pick yourself out of that lifestyle. Like, they constantly are in the state of shuffling and replacing one another, right? Like, so Yiannopoulos is out and then Peterson gets in or whatever. And that's still there, right? There's still a whole set of them. And it's like, how else do you explain them? Because they're idiots, other than the idea that there's sort of this force bubbling up, pushing them from the bottom, which is this sort of mass. Like, how do they have those big numbers? It's because there's a ton of kids, like, at Taco Bell who are educating themselves and raising themselves online. They don't know. Like, that's the closest they'll get to philosophy.
Who are those YouTube dads now?
I mean, you name them, right? Like, there's Peterson, Gavin McGinnis, Stephen Molyneux or whatever.
Stefan Molyneux, yes.
I mean, like there's so many of them. And of course, like, this is also keys into a larger sociological phenomenon where if you're just that age, no matter what your political standing, you're on YouTube, you're hanging out on Discord, you're probably not reading much. Like, I work as a college professor, and it's hard to get my students to read books, but they're on YouTube constantly, right? So they're just getting all their information from YouTube. So, like, this subset of them who are sort of, like, really despairing and happen to be young men, they're drawn to, like, hang out, in a sense, sort of virtually with these sort of, like, YouTube dads or sort of YouTube gurus who are like, oh, I'll help you out. I'll figure out life for you.
Let me ask you this about, like, how many people do you think we're talking about? Like, when we talk about, people unfortunately, I mean, and you say you go out and see them in public. I mean, because I think certainly my own personal experience on, let's say, Twitter, I think I get an outside's notion of how many people are actually on Twitter, because it really is, it feels like everybody's on Twitter, but that's just because I know a narrow set of people, and they're all sort of like-minded, and it just so happens to be that is the key demo for, that's the people I follow on Twitter. But Twitter, is not necessarily representative except for, a specific group. Like, how many people are we talking about here? Because on some level, I still think we're living in an era where we have yet to fully socialize. Society is not caught up with social media. Like, we don't, we had a period where it's like, this guy's got 100,000 Twitter followers. We should get him a book deal. And then you find out, well, it doesn't really work that way. But, nobody's going to buy that book necessarily. But how many people are we talking about?
I mean, that's a really good question. I know that, 4chan is still one of the most popular message boards on the internet, right? There's thousands and thousands of posts an hour or something. So these sites get huge numbers. I am not like a pollster, like, I'm not a numbers guy, so I don't know, like, estimating the sort of the size of the population, I probably get the figure very wrong. I mean, I guess, like, I sort of approach from the other end where I'm, like, looking at someone like Jordan Peterson, and you're like, why, right? Like, how does he have 1 million people listening to him? Like, who are those people, right? So there's sort of like these people who are, to me, not saying very smart things, but they have these huge followings, or Gamergate, right? It's like, well, why did millions of people do this, right? Though, like, compared to sort of the size of the United States, I'm not sure. I mean, to me, just sort of like teaching college, right? All my students know about this. This is sort of the culture they're in, right? So I think if you're a young person, I've tried to sort of fairly describe young people's culture in general, right? So this is sort of a large aspect of it. This is sort of how they regard their politics and their reality, that it's going through YouTube or going through certain message boards. But I guess that's sort of a dance around the idea that I don't know.
Right. And I mean, the thing is, it may not be important. right? Like it's not like I mean, if we had the ability to say like we're going to determine that you need to constitute this amount size of the population to legitimately have this type of authority in our society, and you and I had the ability to do that, it would become more relevant. But what's more fascinating is that it could be very few people, and it's creating. That could be. It's in charge of our culture, which is also, frankly, the reality with things like cable news, right? I mean, we have a very small group of people in cable news who are determining what we decide is our news. I mean, it's sort of a fascinating dynamic. Where do you? Lastly, where do you think it goes from here?
I think it will remain online, and we'll probably see another manifestation in the physical world eventually. It's going to, I think, persist as a political coalition of some sort, that it's not going away, and nor are unfortunately, the mass shootings are going away either, that they've still gone on every month or so. So I think if the underlying causes are addressed, if in some way, the left has better answers for this coalition, right? Like actual real ways out of poverty, actual real opportunities. If I think the left does well in the next election cycle and reaches out to them, then the coalition could be broken up, right? Like, for example, weirdly, like on 8chan and 4chan, like 2 or 3 months ago, half the coalition was like, oh no, we don't like Trump anymore. We like Andrew Yang, because we want $1,000 a month, right? So it's sort of like this pseudo-libertarian socialism or whatever sort of brand of socialism that is like, or something like that. They're like, that's what we want. We're not fascist anymore, right? Because it's all teenagers, right? Or older men who act like teenagers, but that still means they're mercurial and very variable, and they're in a constant state of identity crisis. So it can be broken up. Does it look like it's going to be broken up anytime soon? Right now, maybe not.
I guess we will have to wait and see. The book is It Came from Something Awful, How a Toxic Troll Army Accidentally Memed Donald Trump into Office, Dale Beran. We will put a link to your book at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Hey, folks, and now we've got a bit of a post-roll, another ad to tell you about. Throw back to Sam for that one as well. Sam loves cutting the ads, folks.
Let me remind you, you have the chance to know your dog better than Fur Deep with the most accurate dog DNA test that is on the market, probably ever, that has ever been developed in the history of the world. I mean, it's a relatively recent phenomenon with dog DNA testing, right? I'm talking about the Embark Dog DNA Test Kit. It looks over 250 different breeds. It does 170 different genetic health conditions to help you care for your dog. Look, the bottom line is, it's not just about knowing, like, oh, my dog is part terrier, part golden retriever, part German shepherd. What the heck was going on here? It's also, and vets will recommend this quite often, apparently, you get a sense of how you should be feeding your dog. People love their animals. I don't need to tell you this if you're a dog owner or a cat owner for that matter, but for dogs in particular. And the idea that you can feed your dog better or provide them or be on the watch out for any type of potential diseases and help them is huge. And right now for our listeners, Embark has an exclusive summer offer you can't get anywhere else. Go to embarkvet.com. Use the promo code MAJORITY. Save 15% off your dog DNA test kit. You can discover your dog more than Fur Deep. Visit Embark, EMBARK, vet.com. Use the promo code MAJORITY to save. Quick break in a minute. Michael, tell us about Tuesday.
Nice. That was a good throw. Well, there's actually, we're off next week on TMVS, but this past Tuesday we talked with Shahid Buttar, who's running for Congress against Nancy Pelosi.
Who, frankly, is a pretty unexpected data point in how good candidate interviews go, because he was excellent.
Stunning.
Oh, yeah.
That was an innately good interview. That was yes,
Like,
the highest bar for candidate interviews.
You didn't have to worry about like getting to the end of his fluency on any sort of topic. He had like his own sort of like rich like wells to draw on.
It was an amazing conversation.
I met him at the DSA convention. He was pretty cool. And he even did a really good rap at the Street Fight Trillbilly show.
Wow.
Did you know that he could rap?
I did not. I knew he was a DJ, apparently. But
he's got many talents.
That would be... That is like one of the big... I mean, the only other upgrade that I could imagine in terms of just the extreme improvement would just straight up be Sanders over Trump. The idea of having him in Congress instead of Nancy Pelosi is definitely like New Day, Garden of Eden kind of stuff. Ana Kasparian and I talked about extremism on the right, incitement, and building a little bit of a better left culture. Also Israel-Palestine, bunch of other things were covered. Patreon.com/TMBS. Next week, it will not be video, but on the podcast feed, it will be unlocked, available for everybody. Liz Franzik, who is the co-host of TrueAnon, will join me for a deep dive into Jeffrey Epstein and just the rot, disgusting, grotesque rot of intelligence agencies and American oligarchy. And actually, can Epstein be a launching point for some form of sort of class consciousness? Patreon.com/TMBS. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Thanks to our over 71,000 subscribers there. Our now well over 2,600 patrons. See you there. Thank you. Jamie. Wait, let me try it again. Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, we have on Molly Crabapple, friend of the show, to talk about her arrest at the Amazon ICE protest last week, as well as the massive wave of protests in Puerto Rico and what's next for the Puerto Rican people.
Awesome.
We also have a bonus coming out tomorrow, wherein Molly goes through and translates some of the lyrics of the official song of the protests. I'm talking about Afilando los Cuchillos by Bad Bunny, Ile, and Residente, and it gives us a whole new appreciation for the song. So that is out tomorrow for our patrons. Patreon.com/TheAntifada.
Matt.
Yeah, George. I've been doing my patron-only George Orwell series, but so check that out. We got 2 new episodes on George Orwell on his time in Burma, and we get into some of the more problematic elements of Orwell. So you've been waiting for that, and we're going to release one of the earlier episodes of that for everybody else as I go on vacation. I mean, kind of vacation to Chicago.
Yeah, we're going to Chicago. We're going to be live in Chicago Saturday, folks. Also. Found out something extremely annoying, and I don't know how many people this has affected, but she was tweeting at us on Twitter yesterday, basically saying the link at the Lincoln Tavern was broken. And so somebody was trying to buy a couple of tickets to the TMBS live show in Chicago and couldn't do it because there was a problem on the website. I don't know whether that problem has been solved or not. We love the people at Lincoln Hall. Maybe a bit less... We've communicated with them less than folks at other venues, unfortunately. But if for whatever reason you're having a problem, just show up at the door and come on in. We'll see you August 24th, Lincoln Hall, Chicago, at Chuck Merritt's. We'll be right back, folks.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good.
Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Oh, really? Welcome to the fun half. Michael Brooks here, along with Matt Luck, J.M. Peck, Brendan Finn. So I don't spend a huge amount of time talking about Tulsi Gabbard. I would say, I'm sure some people think we do. I would say in a different political environment, there's some things that are good about Tulsi Gabbard. I absolutely find it mystifying why people would orient around her campaign when Bernie's in the race. But look, I'll be honest. I find it mystifying why people would orient around any candidate besides Bernie. But the problem is, so there's a variety of problems, as an example, with Senator Warren relative to Bernie. And a lot of folks who support Warren over Bernie essentially are just overtly saying that they don't care about the U.S. footprint in the world. They don't care about military spending. They don't care about foreign policy.
Yeah, well, it's really complicated, all right?
It's, you know what?
They don't care about class struggle.
Well, they certainly don't care about class struggle.
Did you see Bernie's tweet? I'll bring it up after this, but he said if there's going to be a class war, it's about time the working class won it.
Oh, that got the RT for me.
Absolutely. The distinction with Tulsi Gabbard is that Tulsi Gabbard's whole selling point is that she is a warrior. Well, right. But that she's a warrior against U.S. militarism and foreign intervention. And, you know, look, if this was 2008 or 2012 and you had a Democrat who said that they opposed foreign invasions, and we're talking about the global environment and the military-industrial complex, which I actually misspoke on TMBS. I said that she does not talk about the military-industrial complex in the same way Bernie does, but that's something I'm glad to correct. She does use that phraseology, and she does speak on that. So absolutely credit where credit is due. But there's also been this extraordinary tension, which now as Bernie Sanders gets more and more clear and has a voting record on cutting defense spending. He's voted against every single Trump military budget increase. Warren's voted for all of them. I believe Tulsi's voted for one of them. And going back really to his record in the 80s as a mayor, calling out the U.S. dirty wars in Central America. Is Bernie's record perfect? Absolutely not. Is anybody's record perfect? Certainly not. But you don't have this other parallel lane of, at times, aggressive support for drone programs, ambiguities about torture. Tulsi, several weeks ago, put out a tweet that she was alarmed that John Lind was going to get released from prison and onto probation. I mean, this is like, if you're worried about John Walker Lind, and I'm sure 99% of you have no idea who he is in today's environment.
Haven't thought about that guy in a while.
To say the least, right? I was going to say, you probably didn't remember who that guy was, the American Taliban. So, that's the type of obsession that, find someone that loves you as much as Tulsi loves the war on terror in that regard.
And she's sending a message when she says stuff like that, too.
Absolutely. And she is, and there's parts of it, again, that I agree with. But she is trying to create what I would call as a left isolationist lane. And we're going to get to this clip in a second because it's very revealing. Actually, we'll do the clip first, but then I'm going to say a few more things about this Modi BJP stuff, because it actually really matters, because this should be a door into people having a much better grasp of Indian politics and the ideological currents that are running through it right now. But first, and I think that Jamie was right to say, what's her main selling point? She's a troop. But a lot of people who obsess over her are going to tell me that it's because she's an anti-imperialist. Now, again, if somebody says, hey, she was right about calling out regime change in Venezuela, yep, that's a totally valid point. There's a number of more narrow, valid cases you can make for her. Again, they don't still stand against Sanders. But I hear a lot of talk about her radicalism, which is not backed by policy, and now quite radically not backed by rhetoric, thanks to our buddy Virgil Texas from Chapo Trap House. What a bizarre world we live in. Asking Tulsi this question at a campaign event in Iowa.
Do you consider yourself an anti-imperialist?
I consider myself a pro-American. Everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm doing comes from a place of love for our country and love for our people, and recognizing how important it is that we have unifying leadership in this country to bring people together so that we can bring about the kinds of changes we need to see. And as far as our foreign policy goes, to end our wasteful, failed policies of regime change so that we can focus on serving the interests of the American people, using the limited resources we have to do so.
So that's, to me, again, first of all, I'm just going to concede right off of the bat. She's not running for, a DSA chairmanship or what. Like, of course she's going to say she loves America, and every political candidate should say that. So don't try to distract with, defending the basic pablum. The pablum is fine. She should say it. That's great. What she did say, and she constantly frames this interventionist stuff as essentially a waste of money and resources versus a moral condemnation of the killing of civilians across the globe. Then when she talks about these vague bipartisan solutions, I'd ask you to look at her vote against Syrian refugees, which to me is a very fundamental vote, a very fundamental red line. And I'd ask you to go back to her rhetoric during the government shutdown, when the government was getting shut down because of even more demands on this immigration war of the Trump administration. These are not areas where you can find sort of common ground. There's broader questions about civic spaces, about even how you make your arguments and appeal to a broader population, which are fine. I'm all ears for. But when it comes to ICE policies, when it comes to terrorizing Syrian refugees, no. Period. Full stop. And I want to get to India because, a lot of the things have already been litigated with Assad and, General Sisi is different. Her visit to General Sisi was not attacked in the mainstream media because the mainstream media whitewashes the Egyptian record, I would say, to a pretty significant extent as well. But there is clearly an interest in leaders in the Middle East who frame themselves as secular strongmen who can clean up Islamists. Now, that coupled with the refugee vote, that's something to consider and be serious about. Now, in India, the answer that Tulsi has put forward and others have put forward, that talking about her political relationship to the RSS and the BJP to the extent that exists is a form of Hindu phobia, and that her interest in South Asian affairs should not be presented in that way. And so, first of all, I just want to say that, I'm a veteran of this stuff because I've been accused of being a self-hating Jew, of harping on people's Jewish identity, because I am absolutely willing to call out people who may be of Jewish descent who back the Israeli apartheid.
Very disloyal.
Very disloyal. So, so the kind of like petty base identity politics is not something to come at me with, frankly, period. I'm not here for it. Now, when she went to India, she absolutely has also met with members of the Congress Party. And incidentally, the Congress Party, which has to some extent preserved a Nehru's vision of a certain pluralism, is not a party that I support or something to write home about in terms of their neoliberalism, corruption, and even horrific rights abuses under Indira Gandhi in the state of emergency in particular. But what you have right now is you have an Indian leadership led by Narendra Modi, who going back to 2002 is already credibly implicated in some of the greatest atrocities on earth. And I see a lot of people talking about the 2002 Gujarat Riots. When Narendra Modi was head of Gujarat, there was a killing spree of Muslims that lasted a couple days. I think the estimates of over 2,000 people murdered in this span. And look, I apologize, and I mean this as an authentic trigger warning. I'm just going to say, lighting people on fire, cutting women's stomachs open with babies, cutting pregnant women's stomachs open. I mean, we're talking truly savage, horrific atrocities. Now, in 2012, there was an Indian-appointed Supreme Court. It wasn't the Supreme Court, but I believe it was a commission appointed by the Supreme Court that cleared Modi of all wrongdoing, and that has been upheld. Now, there have been over 60 inquiries about this by national and international bodies, including a National Human Rights Commission of India report that concluded that violence was supported by state officials in Gujarat. The U.S.'s State Department on Internal Religious Freedom report concluded that the attacks, and I'm quoting now, that the attacks had been premeditated and that officials were complicit, and that there was evidence of police not acting during the assault of Muslims. The U.S. State Department also cited how Gujarat's high school textbooks described Hitler's, quote, charismatic personality and achievements of Nazism. If you go back to the founding of this group, the RSS, which is a kind of far-right Hindu nationalist paramilitary group, and it's somewhat akin to maybe, it's a very imperfect analogy, but if you thought of the KKK as the paramilitary and the Southern Democratic Party was the political arm, the BJP is a political project subsumed in a larger RSS project. And the RSS goes back to the 20s and the 30s, and their leaders, in addition to being ardent and correct fighters for Indian independence, were also, in some cases, very fascinated by Hitlerian models and Nazis. So people can come at me and say, oh, the Indian Supreme, a commission report appointed by the Indian Supreme Court cleared the Prime Minister of India. Okay, I understand that. But I'm thinking that all of us with some type of left inclination, we probably generally have a deep skepticism of state and legal procedures that clear people of wrongdoing when there's overwhelming evidence to the contrary, including ones from independent bodies and including even our own State Department. And just to be really clear, this is the State Department under the Bush administration when the Bush administration was making very, very tight moves with India for a variety of reasons, including to counterbalance China. So there was zero interest in sort of playing interference for Muslim rights in India. Like let's be obvious. And part of the reason that issue actually grew in Congress was that a lot of Christians were killed as well. This is in 2014. Where, and again, people also say this, yes, Barack Obama was very tight with Narendra Modi. Now, I co-wrote a piece before Narendra Modi was elected prime minister saying Obama should, at the very least, keep some distance because of Gujarat and the ideology of BJP. But I also recognize the difference between a congressperson eagerly sort of seeking out a relationship with the head of state versus a bilateral head of state relationship. This is from a piece in the New Indian Express in December 22nd, 2014. Tulsi Gabbard said that Obama and Modi may have buried the hatchet. She said that Modi was, quote, a man on a mission. And I'm quoting from the piece. Modi was denied an American visa for many years after the Gujarat incident, in which claimed the lives of thousands in Gujarat. Now it's back to Tulsi. I think it's clear from both Modi's perspective as well as Obama's perspective that the past has been buried and both are looking towards the future. There's been a lot of misinformation surrounding that event in 2002. Obama's visiting India on its Republic Day is further evidence that that the past is the past and both leaders want to collaborate in a way that benefits both of them. And then it goes on to talk about her role. This is some B-roll of Gabbard's meeting with Modi. There was a personal message from Modi to Gabbard's wedding. Now, again, people who want to say that this is a function of Hindu phobia are making precisely an indistinguishable, a carbon copy argument of people who say criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic or criticizing Pakistan is anti-Muslim. The reality is we should be criticizing and fighting against rightward forces in all of these countries. And there is a reason, by the way, that you can actually see a very tight relationship between Netanyahu and Modi. There is a incredibly diverse Hindu tradition. There's an amazing book by Amartya Sen called The Argumentative Indian. I'd recommend people read it. You can criticize BJP and RSS and Hindutva within Hindu sources. That's not the issue at all. And I really would like people to not only be a little bit honest about Gabbard in this regard, but actually use it as an opportunity, as I say, to try to understand the politics and the dynamics of one of the most important countries on earth and who's actually running it right now, and the types of escalation that we're seeing with regards to Kashmir. That would have been a lot for Virgil to pack into a question, but I think you take my point. And, look, yeah, she did a great job talking about Kamala's criminal justice record. But nobody gets a complete pass.
Ron Paul says some nice things about wars, too.
Ron Paul said a lot of great things about wars. And he might. I would have to double check, but he might have said more about civilian casualties. You're calling from a 516 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is Mike from Long Island.
Hey, Mike. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on?
What's on your mind?
I just wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the gun conversation that's been going on lately, and how it seems like it just seems like a talking point for like mainstream media.
How so? What you mean?
Well, it just seems like there's some things that they're just, we talk about foreign policy and economics, but like the gun rights thing is like something that they're just allowed to talk about.
I think.
Do you understand what I'm saying, or
not really? I mean, I think I'll give you just my 2-second snapshot on guns, and one is I liked what Jamie said yesterday, that if you have a conversation that, because there's a big problem, right? Because a lot of gun control conversations don't take on the gun industry as an industry, as a capital I industry that is a danger to U.S. public health and global public health. Yeah. Actually, the global small arms industry is one of the greatest threats on the planet. And then you do get into this liberal stuff, which I do think is just frankly counterproductive. Look, when I see some, dumb schmuck walking into a Starbucks with paramilitary gear on, of course, make fun of him. He's an idiot. But the broader sort of guns, I do think that is liberal snobbery that is incredibly counterproductive and dumb. And I have no interest in playing that kind of cultural politics. I do have an interest in going after the NRA and the gun industry as a pernicious, dangerous, corrupted industry, right? And then the second thing I would say, the other two quick things, is that it's very difficult because if you really want to take care of guns, you got to do something extremely radical, which I'm not sure that's where I'd want to spend political capital, frankly. And number 3,
yeah, exactly.
The way a lot of gun measures are implemented, and I'm not talking about really basics. Of course, you can do background check. There's all sorts of stuff you can do that's a no-brainer, and I'm not arguing against.
You can stop the manufacture of a lot of these things.
That's the issue, is the manufacture. But on the other hand, I don't want to take. I think a rhetoric of taking away, people's shotguns or whatever is ridiculous. And I also would say that that is not a myth. The origins of stop and frisk in New York City is a anti-gun program, which, by the way, had some efficacy. I mean, New York there's a lot of guns, but but that is a completely racist and racialized policy. So people need to be extremely thoughtful about what they're actually advocating for and who's going to get policed as a result.
I just worry about, like you said, the political capital that you're wasting, because you may alienate some people that are leaning left. I mean, and the right-wingers, they're not going to vote for a Democrat anyway. So, it seems like you're pushing some people away that might have came to your party.
Well, I think that this is the nuance that I would make, and I'm glad you say the real lunatic, gun whatever people are going to vote for the Republicans. I think there's some people that this wouldn't be their primary issue, and they could be persuaded anyways. But I do think that there's ways of signifying to people that you have some basic respect for them, and I think that is almost nothing to do with policy, frankly. Like, I think that and that's look. People want to, demonize him for it, and maybe they cast some votes that we disagree with, but like, it's good that's an advantage that Bernie Sanders, was around a lot of like farmers and stuff, and those farmers were extremely happy to vote for him. It's just a question of like signifying basic respect. Actually, I think Obama really understood that as a politician as well, as a campaigner.
He really stepped in it on guns, though.
Who, Obama?
Yeah.
Oh, with that statement that he made?
Yeah.
That was quintessential because that wasn't supposed to be public. He was literally saying that to a fundraiser, I think like in the Bay Area.
Oops.
Yeah, definitely. Oops.
Yeah, but Obama actually implemented less gun control policies than Trump did.
You're talking about the bump stop,
basically.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't. To be honest with you, I don't know all of Obama's gun control legacies. Are you a paid caller,
he
sir?
He didn't get anything done.
Are you a paid caller, sir?
Allowed to.
No, I'm getting suspicious.
What's that?
Are you a paid caller, sir? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm not a paid caller.
All right. Who are you voting for?
I'm a Bernie Sanders guy.
All right, cool. Actually,
yeah.
All right, respect.
Yeah.
We got no problem here.
I think
all right,
it's
thanks
good
for the
that
call,
Bernie's
man.
Seen as something of a moderate on this issue,
I
because
agree.
there is a lot of, for the small but electorally significant slice of working class people who are swing voters, who could swing from Trump to a Bernie type, this is an issue, and the kind of cultural snobbery towards guns that we hear from liberals is never going to be helpful.
Well, 100%. And what was the thing that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you were making a really smart distinction the other day, Matt, between the ridiculous weekend warrior idiots and people who actually have guns. They're not lying when they say it's hunting or whatever. Like, it actually is part of a life.
Yeah, a lot of people have like hand-me-down shotguns and rifles and stuff like that, and that's like the sort of like gun lineage that I come from, right? Like, I've pheasant hunted a number of times. It's basically a family tradition. I've killed a few deer, but those people. There's two different classes. There's those people, and then you have the weekend warrior types, which the NRA started. And I'm pretty sure Majority Report, we may have even talked about this with a guest, but they started marketing to weekend warrior types with like special guns. Like, look at, because Desert Storm was the TV war, right, and stuff like that. We got all this cool gadgetry. That's a market, right?
Yep.
And we should just not allow that market to exist. So like, if people want to have like a double-barreled shotgun or something like that, fine, I don't care.
And those are the freaks that walk into Starbucks with like
AR-15,
tactical cops.
a barrel.
And I would imagine that, because look, it wasn't. I certainly I didn't grow up. Nobody in my family has guns or anything. But even just growing up, Frank, it's so funny to me that I grew up mostly in basically rural Massachusetts, and you would have hippies and college people, but there's plenty of farms, and you'd go to a lot of houses. There were guns. It wasn't, and it both was A, not such a big deal, and B, it was not. These were not people who would be super excited for some, lunatics who were into Schwarzenegger movies and have their own insecurity issues, sublimating that through getting high power artillery in public places. And so I think a lot of it is just a basic cultural thing. And I think on some level, Woz made this great point. We were talking about this on Woke Bros, and he's just Woz was like, why is it you're into yoga and lattes, they're into target practice. Why is one innately better than the other? It's not. Of course not. And getting into all of that stuff is always a bad call and speaks to people's moralism instead of their actual solidarity.
Oh yeah, it's a distraction, and it's class as identity, which is never something that we should fall into. We need to unite the entire working class if we're going to win, and that includes people who like guns and people who like lattes.
Well, and this isn't just we're not, for anybody who
And
suspects
both.
us of being like this because we support Bernie Sanders. This is consistent with our approach as leftists, which is that you don't make this about individual consumer decisions.
Right.
You go after the industry.
And I'll reiterate, I'm sure we all are very. I mean, I'm into going against the arms industry, as I say, internationally.
Yes, I'm an abolitionist.
Yes,
when it comes to that
precisely.
And we also need to expand these conversations to ramping down military imperialism and serious talks about disarming the police if we really want less gun violence in the world.
Definitely. And also, I mean, that's and I'm sure this is a surprise to no one, but I still see, the Buttigieg, O'Rourke, these should be in Afghanistan. Yeah. Okay. I mean, what the hell are you even? I mean, you're talking about these weapons should be in Afghanistan at the same time that there are reports on increasing civilian casualties. I mean, it's just
they shouldn't be
disgusting.
Anywhere. Okay,
it's disgusting.
Yeah,
people in Chicago don't deserve to get shot, and people in Afghanistan don't deserve to get shot. It's really simple.
Yeah, if your brain goes from oh, look at how many people were ripped through in Las Vegas by this AR-15, this should be in a
war zone. You mean this should be in a place that we've invaded and we've already killed a mass amount? I mean, come on.
I mean, it's not like it's the trenches in World War I, right?
No. And I'm sorry, there is a connection between an incredibly violent culture, whether we're talking about killing people overseas or the cops murdering people, and the kinds of violence that individual lone wolf gunmen perpetrate.
And frankly, the culture follows the actual implements of war, right? All of a sudden
Definitely.
you have armored tanks in your community that the local cops can drive.
That's exactly
and you want
right.
to talk about violent video games? I mean, let's talk about the things that they're based on, which are actually happening.
I actually would. Alfie Kohn, I think. No, I'm forgetting his name. There's a really good author for Zero Books, though, who writes on video games. And I'll say before people get all triggered, I'm not making a joke. And I think he is a game. He is a gamer. But he was basically saying yes, there's the low hanging fruit of of course, Republicans just saying that this is the reason it happens to distract from guns is ridiculous. But also the idea that you can't have analysis of video games. You just have the only word on video games is that they just don't contribute. You can have an analysis of anything, and it could be a good or bad analysis. It could be a moralistic or a smart one, but you should be able to talk about and analyze anything. You're calling from a 205 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is Todd from Birmingham.
Hey, Todd from Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah. Thai, Taiwan.
Sorry, Ty. Ty, what's on your mind, Ty? How you doing?
I was wondering if you guys were going to get anybody on to talk about Italy.
Well,
the Prime Minister is resigning.
I did a conversation on this show about a year ago about Salvini and social media. And we've done some Italy, like, illicit histories of, basically like the kind of like CIA sort of dirty war stuff in Italy in the 70s and 80s. I'm going to ramp up to do more. It's on my radar. That's all I could tell you, but we've done a bit. It's on my radar. Is that it?
All right then. All
right.
Yeah. That's
okay. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, in a tweet at us if you have good sources on that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. You're calling from a 609 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 609.
Guys, hey, this is Kenny calling from New Jersey. What's good, fellas?
Hey, Kenny, can you, I think, just speak a little bit closer to your phone? I think maybe that would be it. I can hear you, but it's not great.
All right. Do you hear me a little better now? It might
Much
be where
better.
I'm speaking from.
Much better.
All right, there.
What's on your minds?
All right. Okay. So I kind of had a sort of private eureka moment. I think like a lot of people my age, I'm consistently frustrated and feeling anxiety over the kind of the really palpable divide between, what I expect as like a voter and someone who wants to be politically active and to change society for the better versus where a lot of the older people in my family are in terms of what they actually believe is fundamentally possible or even what they will like co-sign onto. And I guess it's anecdotal, but I'm hoping that like I can tell you this anecdote and you can tell me if I'm reaching or not, or if I'm onto something here.
Okay, go for it.
So you remember that Jonathan Wiseman tweet, Deputy Washington editor for the New York Times. He had a tweet a while ago where he was, retweeting at Justice Democrats promoting Morgan Harper for, I believe it was, for Congress. Mm-hmm. And, the tweet he posted is, Justice Democrats has backed another primary challenger, this one seeking to unseat an African-American Democrat, Joyce Beatty, who represents Columbus.
Right.
Now,
sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. A few people, including Morgan Harper herself, read that tweet and responded to him, with the acknowledgement that, like, Morgan Harper is also an African-American Democrat from Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
And his response was more or less to just dodge the question completely and say, like, yeah, I saw the picture, but not really acknowledging, like, just the incredibly strange, like, wording of and bracketing of, like, the tweet, which either seems to suggest that he did not know that Morgan Harper was an African-American woman and simply lied about his mistake, or that he was, deliberately trying to drum up some kind of, controversy against Justice Dems.
And either way, it's really bad. So what's your kind of takeaway from that?
Well, my takeaway from it was that, like, I don't really care if he's well, I guess I do care. Like, if you're the deputy editor of one of the major publications in the United States, you should really not be, if you are ignorant of the race of the person who is being run against the incumbent Democrat.
So I understand. I get it. But you said you had a kind of takeaway from it. What's the takeaway?
Well, I tried talking to my parents about it, and I realized that despite the fact that it was abundantly clear to me that he was either ignorant
and what did they say? What did they say?
They just didn't buy it. They were just like, nah, he was. They just didn't buy it. Yeah. It was just like this, like, well, he was just stating that she's an African-American Democrat. And
there's, you know what, man, you're just running up against, and this is actually, this is a way, just obstinate.
It's inertia.
Just obstinate. It sucks.
But a lot of these people know that they can fool enough of the people enough of the time. Like, that's the world we're in now.
Right, and that's why it is important that stuff like that, that he get embarrassed and dunked on over it, because it will, it's important. But I think some people are just dense. Not, I'm not saying in general, but just about this issue. Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah, honestly. All right. Take care, guys.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you. That is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, Weissman got demoted too, by the way.
For that?
Yeah, for that and everything around it. He has previous.
He sucks.
He's a dumb guy.
Just a dumb
guy working for the failing New York Times.
Another dumb guy working for the failing New York Times. And by the way, she was African American.
Even I could tell.
And they were both African American.
How do these people get these jobs?
And Jonathan Weiss
Ivy
didn't
League.
know.
It makes me feel both better and worse about myself to see the kind of idiots who get the jobs that I could never get.
So this is Donald Trump.
This is not on the sound sheet. This is new, hot from the press.
Donald Trump, whose whole administration, basically, I think their primary, one of their primary things has been to make it harder for people to, I'm forgetting the exact example. The point is that for all the posturing, he's extremely hostile to gay rights because he runs a Republican administration. Here he is. When did this drop? Today? Here he is, Donald Trump, talking about his gay rights record. Wait. Okay, all right, let's restart this. Donald Trump, remember when Donald Trump was running for president and he said, what's the best book? The Art of the Deal is the second best book ever written. What's the first one? And someone's like, the Bible. And he's like, that's right, the Bible.
Love me some 2 Corinthians.
And he's super into 2 Corinthians. So this is, and Sassy Trump had an amazing Donald Trump Bible rundown. He's back at it today on Bloomberg Politics.
Okay. You mentioned the Bible. You've been talking about how it's your favorite book. And you said, I think last night in Iowa, some people are surprised that you say that. I'm wondering what 1 or 2 of your most favored Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. When I talk about the Bible, it's very personal. So I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into.
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite.
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Yeah.
Even to cite a verse that you like.
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible. The whole Bible is an incredible. I joke. Very much so. They always hold up the Art of the Deal. I say my second favorite book of all time. But I just think the Bible is just something very special.
Oh, my God. Oh, you like the Bible? Name 3 of their songs.
He's so, Jesus, it's a problem and he's still funny. Oh, man. It's very.
I wouldn't want to get into that's private.
Religious people, they're very seldom to quote you from their holy books because it's private.
What does HUD do? Oh, that's private.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into something private.
I wouldn't want to get into the details of that. I would just say that it's very important and it's great.
And I love it.
And I love it. It's a very special agency.
I like the bit with Jesus in it and the bit with God.
But that's why you like both in a certain sense.
Yeah, and I couldn't choose one.
Yeah,
can't choose
so
one.
hard.
It's like Godfather 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's like it's when you really think about it, Godfather 1 and 2 exist as a whole. So it's crazy to pick one which better.
Do you think the interviewer knew what he was doing there?
Well, that was Halperin, and I think he did because normally he wouldn't ask questions like that, but I think he's got to I think he wants to basically get some shine.
Definitely. No, they knew what they were doing. Colorado guy. It's time to tax the rich out of their lives of illusion and back into the slow roasting hell that is reality for ordinary Americans. Economic recovery plan in 3 steps. Reform the tax code, force corporations to finally pay federal and state taxes, also raise the top marginal rate up to 90%, cancel student debts, reinvent the economy around green renewable energy while rapidly shifting away from high finance. Lula Livre left his best and much love to everyone. Nice. Waterboat from Kashmir. Some more info on Kashmir. Some selective landlines are open, but still essentially an information blackout. To quote a Kashmiri activist in HuffPost, India, in the 21st century, there's absolutely no reason for shutting down the internet. The only reason is that you want to carry out human rights abuses without the world watching. Absolutely. Indian troops are detaining and beating Kashmiri journalists, forcing them to delete footage. At the same time, Indian electronic and print media is embedded with the Indian military. They're getting rides in military helicopters and armored vehicles. Think invasion of Iraq, right? There is a campaign of terror in Kashmir, which is difficult to describe, but I'll leave you with the following. Security forces are breaking into homes and destroying food rations, detaining boys as young as 7, purposely abusing young women and girls publicly to humiliate them. And I'm only writing what is trickling out of the Western press. Reality on the ground is much worse. It's disgusting.
Yeah, going after food rations is sort of like OG genocide move for
absolutely.
like 400, 500 years.
That's right. This Modi regime is at the heart of global fascism. Donald Trump. Let's forget it. We'll do the let's do this first. So Bernie Sanders has been putting out incredible policy proposals. And he's the reason that things like Medicare for All, who he's still absolutely the only candidate to trust on, Kamala Harris has fully reversed herself and backflipped on that. Joe Biden is overt that he does want to keep major elements of our failed and catastrophic health system in place. And even Elizabeth Warren has not foregrounded that issue and has danced around it significantly enough that if this is your primary issue, which is that every single human being in this country gets full health care with no BS and no nonsense, Bernie Sanders is that candidate. In the last couple of days, he's put out groundbreaking proposals on criminal justice, labor, and now an amazing new Green Deal proposal. Now, I've criticized the rhetoric of plans before, and I want to make a really clear distinction here. The reason that this sort of fetishizing of plans is problematic is because nobody is going to just go into the White House and put through plans. We don't live in the British system. We don't live in the Westminster model. So the only way you're going to have a prayer of getting anything passed is with a massive ground movement around you to get it done. The first phase of Bernie's campaign and ongoingly is showing you that he actually has that movement, which he does. Completely incomparable compared to any other candidate in terms of ground level volunteers and always leading in small level donations. He will have the context to put forward these bold, radical, and of course, the most progressive proposals. This is, let's do a string of tweets. This was beautiful. We said this yesterday. If there's going to be class war in this country, it's about time the working class won that war.
Let's get it.
Hell yeah.
That's the truth. Then he said this. Fossil fuel executives should be criminally prosecuted for the destruction they have knowingly caused. # Green New Deal. I'm not a prison person in general, but absolutely, at the very least, financially liable, and certainly held criminally accountable for literally the suffocation and ending of life prospects for planet Earth. That's what the CEO of Exxon and the executive board of Chevron or BP or any of these companies are doing.
I mean, at the very least, since corporations are people, we should see some corporate death sentences.
Oh, definitely. Corporations are people. We're going to need to throwing out the death sentence all over the place. Then he said this about Jay Inslee. As I said, Jay Inslee was really one of the only also-rans who had anything useful to say. Congratulations to Jay Inslee on his impactful campaign to bring climate crisis to the forefront of the national conversation. There's no more important issue facing humanity. Together we'll work to pass a Green New Deal and create millions of new jobs. And I'm going to quote now a little bit from a write-up on Bernie's Green New Deal. The proposal, Democratic presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders released a sweeping $16.3 trillion climate plan on Thursday, vowing to create 20 million jobs and completely zero out planet heating emissions by 2050. The proposal outlines easily the most ambitious vision for a Green New Deal to date, which calls for a massively expanded public ownership of everything from power generation to groceries. See, this is so fundamental because that Green New Deal, of course, also needs to be a jobs plan, so it has a broad buy-in. It needs to be a radical deployment of renewables, and that includes breaking up energy monopolies and reabsorbing a lot of those parts of that industry into public ownership and democratic accountability. And it also applies to things like food systems, which of course are also a major part of the climate crisis, which is why Bernie's leadership on breaking up agricultural conglomerates fits in. But in addition to that, this is another area that we need to talk of as a public good. It is an insane and fundamental global public threat that so much of the food supply is in private hands. That is fundamentally dangerous, just as with healthcare and housing. And also, of course, food is a justice issue. There's still tens of millions of people in this country that are food insecure. So this is an incredible proposal. The scope and challenge ahead of us share some of the same similarities with the crisis faced by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1940s, the plan states. Faced with battling a world war on two fronts, both in the East and West, the United States came together within 3 short years and restructured the entire economy in order to win the war and defeat fascism. As president, Bernie Sanders boldly embraced the moral imperative of addressing the climate crisis. The plan opens with Sanders, I'm continuing to quote, the plan opens with Sanders vowing to slash U.S. emissions 71% below 2017 levels by 2030 with a 100% renewable electricity and zero emissions vehicles. He declares war on the fossil fuel industry with proposed bans on fracking, drilling in public lands, and all imports and exports of oil and gas. And threatens companies with civil and criminal charges for polluting and obstructing climate action. He pledges $200 billion to help developing countries reduce their own climate pollution by 36% in the next decade. That is a brilliant model for a healthy partnership with China and India, as well as developing countries across the board. And this also has major implications for civil liberties, because when he talks about criminal and civil liability for preventing climate action, that would also have a be very transferable for all of these federal and state initiatives to criminalize protesters, like the water protectors in Dakota. And so I'll just say a bit more. It has a generous pledges for workers animate Sanders' proposal. The plan, which comes the same week the campaign released its plan to boost union, promises 5 years of unemployment insurance, wage guarantees, housing assistance, job training, pension support, and priority job placement for all workers displaced by the transition. And it offers, quote, early retirement support for those who choose or can no longer work. And it proposes high wages and union protections across nearly every sector. And how do you pay for it? Well, you scale back military spending drastically. Spent on protecting the global oil supply. It's 100% right. And $1.31 trillion from federal and state welfare due to the creation of millions of good-paying unionized jobs. And that is actually true. You will have less people utilizing emergency programs like food stamps if they have full job protection, union benefits, and high wages. Nothing wrong with acknowledging that. I usually, when the proposals are small bore, I have a big problem with that framing. But when you're talking about a radical restructuring of the economy, which would improve the baseline for everyone, I have no problem acknowledging the obvious that, of course, most people prefer serious union jobs as well as retraining and early retirement assistance and pensions to stopgap programs. And then there's a variety of other proposals. I mean, look, this guy, there's also a Righting the New Deal's Wrong sections, which focuses on the civil rights dimension.
That's so important.
The plan calls for a $40 billion climate justice and resilience fund as well. And it promises to adhere to the principles of environmental justice first set forth by the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991 and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Look,
hell yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. If you have any type of remotely serious left politics or even just any type of keen understanding of the future and concern for the broad base of humanity, this is the candidate. And this is also the only candidate who has a prayer of enacting any of this stuff, because he understands that just as it would be profoundly foolish to dismiss the power of the federal bureaucracy and actually acquiring the instruments of state power, it's also delusional to think that you can do it without a mass-based movement in concert and coherence with you. The Sanders campaign is not just the best campaign. It's a completely different thing, and I hope people will get serious about it.
Absolutely. I also like that, as far as I know, his plan sidesteps any nod to the kind of green militarism that we've heard from
Talking
Elizabeth
about cutting
Warren.
the military. He's talking about cutting military spending.
Yeah.
Which it's the number one of. I might be wrong.
Draws the connection very clearly between, how are we going to pay for it, and what are we spending way too much money on right now?
And when Elizabeth Warren talks about green militarism, she could never support the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Because if you cannot see a direct line between, as an example, why did Bolsonaro visit CIA headquarters when he first came to the United States? Matt, this is important. What is this?
Yeah, and we're actually just now getting an ad block on it. But basically, the U.S. government is basically the number one polluter in the entire planet, producing more than Sweden and Denmark.
Right.
So you're not going to green that up.
No, I mean, and even inside their own bill, there's an emergency waiver on some of the targets if it's deemed to be like a national security necessity. And I'm sure that there will be no funny business with that inside the Pentagon. I mean, look, once again, it's just a question of where we're at. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when people like Thomas Friedman were saying that, the U.S. military would lead the way on climate and it would be a muscular Green New Deal. And I understood some of the political mechanics behind those arguments. Fortunately, we're in a much better place due to Occupy, due to the Sanders campaign, due to movements all across the country. We don't have to play that game. We can start to work to fundamentally restructure. And that's what the Sanders campaign represents. And that is also why, in fact, he does have the broadest base of support amongst working people of every type of background.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, I was disappointed that full decriminalization of sex work was not included in his criminal justice platform. This is something that we just passed a resolution on at the DSA convention to try to hold our endorsed candidates accountable. But this is a movement that's picking up steam right now. Sex workers are becoming a constituency and an active voice for the first time. And I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but I really believe that he can be pushed on this.
Well, and I just also want to just say, like, of all of these candidates, who would be pushed on that? I'm not even necessarily saying he will, but like, who has the constituency, the policy advisors, and the inclinations?
Yeah, it's
and
Bernie.
I think it's just obvious. And I also just want to say I totally hear that. That's very important and very valid. And also, like, a plan that would, if enacted, immediately cut the prison population by 50%, that really needs to be foregrounded. I mean, that is a radical decrease of human suffering, along with ending cash bail. I mean, banning the death penalty. That plan cannot be de-emphasized how radical that is. And also, as soon as the dynamic shifts, and in fact, I think you'll see it in the coming months, the dynamic will already shift. He's going to get hit on that plan from the right by Harris and Biden and others. And certainly in a general election, Trump is going to fearmonger the hell out of all of this.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do. We have to end fairly soon, so let's do. What is it? This is look. Donald Trump cannot do this under any legal mechanism that we have today. Now, obviously, the courts have been totally compromised, and the courts are another area where you're going to need some serious strategy planning on. But this is both. You cannot de-emphasize how important this is in and of itself, because who knows where we'll be if, God forbid, Donald Trump is reelected. And also because this is the same administration that is killing children through kidnapping and neglecting them, and now wants to hold them indefinitely. Here he is talking about birthright citizenship. This is the re-election. This is the re-election. It's racism, xenophobia, and conspiracy theories. There's very little room left for fake economic populism. That was a major part of the equation in 2016, which I hope liberals can understand. But I hope lefties can understand that in 2020, that's not going to be really on the list here. This is what he's got left.
Say it. We're looking at that very seriously. Birthright citizenship, where you have a baby in our land, you walk over the border, have a baby. Congratulations, the baby is now a U.S. citizen. We're looking at it very, very seriously. I don't know how you found that out, but that's very good. We are looking at birthright citizenship very seriously. It's frankly ridiculous.
There it is. I mean, again, look, just be clear what Donald Trump and what the Republican Party need to do. And also be really clear. This is another reason I always keep saying, accepting the science of climate change does not matter that much as a political analysis as to why it is occurring and how to actually address it. Because when the right starts accepting the reality of global climate refugees and changes in atmosphere and weather, they're going to come up with enhanced apartheid systems to deal with that. If you read Achille Mbembe, who wrote a depressing and brilliant piece in 2016, before Trump was elected, it was called The Age of Humanism Was Ending. He looked at Gaza as a prototype for North and South, rich and poor. Watch Children of Men. I mean, Children of Men does hold up as the most brilliant dystopia movie, I think, certainly of this century so far. That's what's going to be put on the table. And that's why you need a truly radical response.
Yep. That's why something like, whether you call it open borders or the free movement of people, is going to be so important going forward as a way to counter this rising tide of right-wing eco-fascism, or whatever you want to call it, right?
Well, I just want to add to that, which is that you need to center it, in my view, as a fight against colonialism and against the reasons that are rooted in these horrific maldistribution of resources and abuses, which is what we don't want climate refugees.
Right.
So when we have, nobody wants that, period. When you have refugees, when you have a crisis, you respect. And what's interesting to me is things like protocols on refugees that are already in the books are actually pretty good. They're actually pretty humane. And so you need to synchronize following those international obligations, but actually also seriously dealing with the fundamental drivers of the crisis as well.
Oh, yeah. It makes no sense to do it in a vacuum, right? Because climate change, imperialism, and capital itself is still going to be moving people around. And that's not truly free movement if that's what's moving them. It needs to be paired with a ramping down of imperialism, a ramping down of colonial violence, and a closing of borders and a placing of restrictions on capital, which also means international labor regulations.
And absolutely. And it's compelled movement. It's not free movement. So you have these situations where you have absorption of massive population changes that are generated by our foreign policy, our abuse, global inequities. And then when they do arrive in different environments and different contexts, it's political moneymaker for the demagogues and the bigots. And also, again, it's like the classic model too of the elites or the capital class does not deal with and interface with the changes that actually occur when cities and towns transform themselves. So you need to have a clear moral argument against racism, xenophobia, and that's why you need to destroy ICE, and you need to bring in, even frankly, Warren's proposal. I mean, 10 times as many refugees is not that many. I think we were down to only we're well below 500,000. I think we're even down to 30,000 in 2019, which is abominable, atrocious. And then, of course, there's the whole other element that needs to be disaggregated, which is that there's 15, 20 million people who live here today who just need to be immediately granted citizenship. I won't even say amnesty, because that implies some great wrongdoing. But we need to disaggregate those things, and we need to make the core of it on the climate military and trade policies that lead to these patterns, in my view. And that's another reason too. I'll say I think his proposals domestically are cool, but Julian Castro, with his record and his politics, talking about a Marshall Plan for Central America is horrifying to me. It sounds to me like ensuring that the Honduran military base that we have there is well lubricated and there's more sweatshops. At least as I see it. You're calling from a 703 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
How we doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Axel from Maryland. Oh, good, man. I'm picking up an Uber Eats order here in a sec, so this might get awkward here in a bit. But
why don't you get to the question?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about Bernie. I just wanted to talk about how I'm the only driver in the DMV area with a Medicare for All bumper sticker on my car.
Nice.
And I get a lot of honks. I get a lot of drive arounds. We have a Don't Tread on Me license plate in Virginia that a lot of Republican conservative guys get. So it's like they're like, yeah, like stick it to the man. I got a snake on my license plate. Like they're really like they think they're super super cool. But I did. Oh yes, my Uber Eats order is here. Thank God. I'll keep talking. It doesn't matter. So also I wanted to talk about how I recently just got promoted to like a managerial position.
Okay.
And I'm kind of struggling with the. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I'm struggling with the whole thing because I really do think like there's way too much like labor exploitation, wage exploitation, things like that. Yeah. And we get a lot of labor goals where we literally can't have anyone in the whole store to have an hour of overtime. Like I'm not even allowed any overtime. Like nobody is.
Yeah.
Do you find it hard to kind of struggle with that, just like exploiting labor thing? You know, just like being in charge of a business and kind of having those views, but struggling to like implement them?
I mean, to be really honest with you, I do like it would be much harder if it was in like an actual business. Like, you know, I guess like, and maybe like to me, like if you're talking specifically about like TMBS, like having some people come in and, you know, work like,
it's just like
basically
I mean, like, I know, like, you know, just like having to be like, hey, Matt, I know we're pals. You got to be here at 6. You know what I mean? Just like
that kind of thing. No, that doesn't bother me. To be honest, I mean, I think obviously if it was like, I mean, it would have to be such a radically different situation. I mean, if one of the reasons, and this is way ahead of myself, but like when I think of even like as my show grows and we think about like what we're doing, and primarily I think about what I'm doing, frankly, because I, you know, just definitionally put in like, you know, it's a full-time job for me. One of the reasons I wouldn't necessarily want to scale in a certain way is just I would just never want to be in a position of making of actually like of dealing with like full-time and that whole kind of structure. I know I wouldn't really want to make those decisions as of now.
It's tough telling like 17-year-old kids they have to clock out. You know what I mean? It's tough to be like,
yeah,
hey, you got to go home or you have to do this, when it's like you grow a repartee and a relationship with these guys, especially some are so young.
Yeah. I hear you.
Also, just one more thing. I just wanted to brief comment on the election.
Okay.
Pete Buttigieg fucking sucks. I can't stand that guy.
Oh, well, you're a good man.
Lula Libre.
Lula Libre. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
I don't know what that would feel like. I feel like that would feel really sick to be in like some type of like environment like that. What did you say?
Speaking.
Okay. All right. Yeah, guys. We're gonna take one more call, 2 more IMs, and then we are out of here. Because speaking of not coercing people to work extra, I am not Sam. All right. You are calling from a 720 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Mike. This is Robert from Colorado.
Hey, Robert. How's it going?
It's going okay. I'm at work and get paid.
Word.
I wanted to talk about what the normal, like, right-wing politics are.
What do you mean by
that?
that?
I worked at this power plant. So just what the normal person in the right-wing, like Trump kind of guy is.
Uh-huh.
So I worked in this power plant in Dearborn.
Yeah.
Where Talib, that's her district. These guys are insane. There's, like this one guy, he was former Army. This guy's, like, he's a fascist, like, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, like, 6 months ago, that one guy at the border got arrested for arresting, like migrants?
Mm-hmm.
They were all complaining, like, oh my God, this patriot got arrested for,
Yep.
And they were like, you know how we should really stop the migrants? Like, wink, wink, we should execute them. Like, that's what they think. And he's kind of the extreme one. But yeah, they're like, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good plan. And then like another guy, he was.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just.
Anyone actively MAGA to that extent is a fascist.
Yeah, I keep trying to disaggregate between. I think
and you might have people in your family that are fascists. It sucks,
right? And I think that there is I am in a lot of reaction to some of the like rad lib, whatever you want to call it, tendency to dismiss people, to not hear people out, to not have like, and also just frankly realize when sometimes like we're wrong sometimes, right? Like. There's a lot of subtleties to this conversation that really matter, but one thing that is not subtle is that if you are actively supporting Donald Trump right now in 2019, you are either a fascist authoritarian or a oligarch or somebody who is, I mean, just to put it generously, just completely off of the fucking map. And, that's the truth. So it doesn't surprise me at all. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you. All right, we're going to read 2 IMs, and then we're going to get out of here. Hey, Michael, regarding the recession, do you think a global discussion needs to be had? Economic powerhouses around the globe are starting to either stagnation or recession. I work for a large European country. We've had We've had several meetings regarding economic stress in Mexico, China, Germany, UK, and Brazil, Hong Kong, Singapore, and more. This is clearly larger than the U.S. trade wars and shows we're all interconnected when we like it or not. How do we start a discourse to make this a global issue? Well, I mean, it is a global issue. I don't think that there's much of a context right now for having global conversations of any sort. I think that's, that's obviously a big part of the problem of today. Let's see. And the final IM of the day. Gotwitland. Hey, Michael, would you ever interview Chomsky for TMBS? Of course. All right, folks. Tomorrow, Ben Mankiewicz with a movie recommendation. Then Matt Binder comes into studio. Take care.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gone. shifted in and